I am the president of the St. Clair Beekeepers Association. Just a moment about the association. We have currently probably 100 active members, and our St. Clair Beekeepers Association covers about 10 counties in southern Illinois. So, and our main objective is to educate everyone a little bit more about the bees. So I'd like to talk to you about bees today. There's two things I'd like to bring up. First, we'll talk about the bees, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about honey. So I'm going to leave this on the table with some spoons. And what I'd like for those of you who are interested to take those little containers and sample the honey, if you will. You're going to notice there's quite a difference in it. Back to the bees. There's a lot of concern about the honeybee at this time. There's a situation that's going on across the country, and it's been around the world in some cases. It's called colony collapse, and I'm sure some of you have heard some things about colony collapse. What happens with that they found out about colony collapse is the bees are orientated to their home. And what happens to them is they fly away from home and they can't remember how to get back. And there's been various amounts of thought concerning this, what was causing it. They really do not know. However, they're coming to a consensus that the food that's being processed today, most of it's genetically altered, and it has pesticides in it, and these pesticides are finding a combination of them are most likely causing a colony collapse. This area in southern Illinois, we've really not been plagued with that problem too much. We have other problems that we have to deal with. Right now, our biggest problem is a little guy called a small hive beetle. He's a very small hive beetle, and he's round, and he can fly. And what they do is they get into a hive, and the hive's strong, there's not a problem. But if the hive gets a little weak, and I'll talk to you a little bit how that happens, the hive beetle will start laying eggs, and the egg hatches one day. The larvae climb all over everything, and they leave this slime and just really devastate the inside of the hive. And what it ends up happening is most of the bees leave and the rest of them die. So it's a little bit of a problem. A honeybee. Let's talk about the bee for just a moment. The honeybee consists of 3 members of the family. There's the queen. She's the honcho of the hive, more or less to say. And then there's a drone, and there's a worker bee. The queen lives 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and she lays up to 3,000 eggs a day when she's laying. They start laying usually in early March, and we have a cutoff date. Of course, it's not definite, we don't know, but usually we figure by the 20th of October she stops laying for the winter time. Most of the workers, they take 21 days to hatch out. For the first 3 weeks of their lives, honeybee is called a house bee. They feed the young, the larvae, they clean the house, they take care of things. The last 3 weeks, basically, of their life, they become a forager. They go out and they look for the pollen and the nectar. So they are a great boon to us, human beings, as they are wonderful pollinators. Of course, they're not the only pollinator that exists. There's quite a few pollinators. The honeybees are so very interesting if you ever got interested in them, just to watch them. When a worker goes out and finds a source of nectar or pollen, she will come back to the hive and she will do what they call the waggle. She'll position her abdomen in a certain degree to the sun, which tells all the other bees in the hive the direction that the pollen or the nectar is in. And then she'll do a little shake and dance. And however many times she waggles, that tells them how far away the nectar or the pollen source is. So they're very interesting creatures. Most of us who are professional beekeepers are hobbyist beekeepers. I'm more of a hobbyist, I guess, really to say. But I take last year I took 700 pounds of honey and I sell every bit of it, so I guess I am kind of semi-professional. We are very concerned about our bees. Last winter, I'm sure all of you are aware that the winter was devastating for all of us. It was the worst than we've seen in 30 years. It's been the worst winter. Across the board in southern Illinois, we lost 53% of our hives due to the cold weather. Most of it, I think a lot of it, I can't say most of it, but a lot of it was we were not prepared for such a cold winter. And basically, the nail in our coffin was on the 2nd of January. A cold front came through, and the temperatures, the wind chills dropped to 21, 22 below zero. And that is what put most of our hives in jeopardy and took them out. Some of the beekeepers lost 70%. Some of the beekeepers lost 50%. I had 14 hives going into the winter. Just after Christmas, I had 14 healthy hives. Just after, by the end of February, I had 4 hives left. So we took a lot of precautions, but they were too little and too late. This year, we'll be better prepared and to get the bees through the winter, because this winter's also supposed to be pretty hard. The last time I brought a beehive with me, but due to the time constraints, we don't have that. But let me talk to you a little bit about how a beehive works on a hobbyist or a professional standpoint. A beehive has a bottom board on the bottom. It's called a bottom board. And that's where the bees land and go into the hive. There are various kinds of bottom boards. Some of them are vented. Some of them have screen on them. All the ones that I produce have drawers that you can put a little bit of oil and water in to catch those pesky hive beetles. But that's the bottom. Next, you'll see a deeper box. When you see a beehive, those are kind of stacked up looking. The deeper boxes are called brood boxes, and those boxes belong to the bees. Inside each of the boxes, there's 10 frames that sit in a row, and the frames, they have the foundation that the bees draw out with wax, and they put brood in there, they store pollen in there, they store nectar in some, and they store honey. Most hives consist of 2 brood boxes, 2 deeps we call them. These are the bees. This is the bees' home. All the honey, anything in that box belongs to the bees. On top, usually the second brood box is a box called a super. It's 6 3/4 inches tall. It's a little narrower or a little shorter than the brood box, which is 9 3/4 inches tall. And that's what we collect the honey in. That honey belongs to us. But we never touch any of the honey that's in the brood boxes, because that is the honey that is used to get the bees through the winter. When the queen gets to a point in her life where she's thought of by the hive as a group, that she's not producing the things that they want her to produce, they decide to replace her. So they take and build some queen cells, and she'll put an egg in there. There can be 4 queen cells, 2 queen cells, 20 queen cells. It just depends on what the bees want to do. They feed her a thing called royal jelly that comes off the forehead of the worker bee, and that produces a new queen. Usually when the first new queen hatches out, she'll go and sting all the rest of them that haven't hatched out to death. So at this point, you have a new queen and an old queen in the hive. The new queen, in most cases, will go on what's called a maiden flight, and she'll mate with up to 15 drones. And that's one of the only 2 times in her life that she'll ever fly. When she comes back, and sometimes her maiden flight happens after, but when she comes back, she takes over the hive. Well, that leaves the old queen with nothing to do, so she has to leave. So she takes off, and she takes half the bees with her. Now, just before this happens, they have a song that you can hear them. They kind of sing a little song, and the bees gorge themselves on honey. They eat enough honey to sustain them for about 3 days. Then half the hive with the old queen leaves. How many of you ever seen a swarm in a tree on a mailbox?
Yeah.
This is that situation. It's called a swarm. Half the hives left, they're looking for a new home. So the swarm will gather wherever you see them. Sometimes on a tree limb, sometimes on the mailbox, sometimes on the bumper of your car, wherever. After they gather there, they'll send scouts out to look for a new home. And when the scouts find a place that is applicable, the whole hive will go to that place and then they'll establish a new home then. They'll immediately draw out new comb and the queen will go to work laying eggs. Well, immediately the workers make another new queen and she hatches out and kills the old queen. That is how the bees propagate themselves. So, like I say, bees are very interesting. I'd like to move on a little bit, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the honey. We sell a lot of honey, and we have a lot of people with a lot of questions about honey. So I thought I'd just touch on the honey part a little bit. Honey that you buy in most stores commercially comes from one or two places. Well, one or three places now. But basically, most of it comes from China, Argentina, and some's coming from India now. So what are you getting when you get these bottles of honey that are on the store that come from these foreign places? Number one, it's pasteurized. Now, what does pasteurization do for you? It destroys the enzymes that are in the honey. So if you bring the honey to a temperature that's above 120 degrees, the enzymes are destroyed, so the benefit of the honey is being taken away from you. The other thing they do is, on a commercial basis, is filter it. And when they filter it, it takes the pollen particles out of the honey, another thing. So a lot of people have allergies. Does anyone in the room take honey for their allergies? Does it work?
Local honey.
Does it work?
Mm-hmm.
It works. And a lot of people don't quite understand, but local honey is really good for your allergies. My wife has had headaches for years, and she'd take 1 teaspoon of honey and a cup of tea every morning, and the headaches are pretty well not bothering her anymore. Now, we hear two words when we speak of local honey: local and raw. Okay. Local honey means that it was produced within 50-mile radius of the consumption. So if you live here in Alton, local honey is a radius of 50 miles around. That's local. The other thing that we talk about is raw honey. What does it mean to have raw honey? Honey that is raw is not pasteurized, it's not filtered. What we do as beekeepers, we gather the frames that I spoke of earlier and bring them into the honey house where we're going to spin it, and we have what's called an extractor. The bees fill up the comb with honey. You put a wax cap on top of it. We come along and cut that cap off there to expose the honey. Put the frame in an extractor, which is a centrifugal machine. Mine runs by hands, but the larger ones that run by motors, and mine holds 3 frames, but the bigger commercial guys, 50 or 100 frame spinners. And the honey's spun in a circle, and the centrifugal force throws the honey out into the container. It sinks to the bottom. At the bottom, we have what's called the honey gates, nothing but a valve. You open the valve, and the honey pours in a bucket. Well, in a 5-gallon bucket, there's a sieve, and it's a 2-layer sieve. The top one's larger, but the bottom one is 4 microns. So what this does, it strains out more or less all the bee parts that are in the honey. Because you'll find wings and you'll find dead bees sometimes and legs, and most people don't want to eat those parts. Of course, there's a few people who are really, they really believe in raw honey, and they insist that those parts be in the honey. So, but that's a little unusual. After it goes to the sieve and the wax and the bee parts are strained out of it, it's put in a bottle. bottles look like these. And it's pure raw honey. Honey lasts forever. They found it in the tombs, they found it everywhere. But what happens to honey? Most of you all buy honey. What happens if you don't eat it? It's hard. It's sugars. First, it gets a real sugary taste to it, and then it gets hard. So what do I do with the honey? If you'll take that honey, and a lot of people want to put it in the microwave, but if you put it in the microwave again, you're going to destroy the enzymes in the honey, the benefits of it. Take a pot of water and put it on the stove, bring it to a boil. Turn the heat off, put the bottle in the pot. Now, you don't want the water to be over the top of the lid because it might get the bottle of it, you know. And it might take you 2 or 3 times, but it'll reconcentrate and it'll be just the same as it was. A lot of the places that sell honey commercially, they heat the honey up a little pretty warm. Now, when honey gets too warm, it starts to get stronger and dark. The color will turn darker and it'll get a little bit stronger. Now, I've given you 3 samples of honey. This, you guys have tried it, right? Did you taste the difference?
Yes.
The difference. The bottles are over there. But did you folks taste the difference in the honey?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's at this table. Have you tried it?
One was a little more grassy than the other.
I'm sorry?
One was a little more grassy than the other grassy.
Okay. The darker bottle comes from the Eucalyptus tree. I was out in Nevada a year or so ago when I bought some of that just to have it. The other bottle, maybe you need to take the towel.
Take the landscape.
The other bottle is called Wildflower. It's actually made from the flowers of the Joshua tree, which is basically a cactus. And this little bottle is the local honey that I produce. Wherever you get honey, local or not, it's always going to taste different. Every honey is going to have a different taste to it because the honey bees are going to gather the taste is varied by the pollen and the nectar that they're gathering. So that's going to make the honey taste different.